Hi everyone, I'm Liz and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Fat Quarter Hourglass Remix Quilt Along series. Sorry for the delay, but I am back to show you how I put together my quilt top and prepare my quilt backing and get everything ready to be quilted. So today we're going to start with making our quilt top. In the last video, we made all of our hourglass blocks and trimmed them all nice and square. And so now I have a stack of 80 quilt blocks ready to be laid out into a quilt. So when I'm making a quilt with random blocks where I want kind of a random placement, then I like to lay all my blocks out in the layout that I'll eventually sew them together in, so I can make sure that there aren't any strong color groupings all in one spot, or I don't have the same fabrics all lined up together, things like that. And so if you have a design wall in your space, awesome. I wish I had room for one, but I use either the floor of my living room or a bed, depending on the size of the quilt I'm working on. So this quilt I laid out on my king size bed. I had just enough room and just started laying out the blocks randomly, stepping back, looking, rearranging blocks, just kind of getting a layout that I liked. And then the most important step is, once I have a layout that I like, I take a picture of it. This picture will become my most used reference when I'm assembling the quilt top. If I have any questions about, oh wait, did I mess up these two blocks? Which one goes to the left? Which one, I can go back to my photo and be like, okay, yes, this block was first in the row, then this one. So it's just a really good reference, because once you have a layout you like, or at least for me, I don't want to mess it up. It is a random quilt, so you could really probably just put all these quilt blocks in a bag, shake it, and then maybe just pick randomly. Maybe that's easier. I'm a little too perfectionist for that, so I like to lay all of mine out, get a layout I like, take a picture of it, and then follow it as a guide. So once I have all the blocks laid out and my picture taken, then I stack the blocks in order, row by row, and stack them up 1 to 8, wait, how many rows did I have? 10. 1 to 10, and then bring them to my sewing machine just like that, so that I can just pick up and sew and they're all in the right order. And then if I get lost, or if I think I've messed something up, I just refer back to the photo that I took to make sure that I have everything in the right order. Okay, so now that I have all the blocks stacked up in order, let's take them to the sewing machine and sew together our quilt top. Okay, so now that I have all my blocks laid out, I am gonna start sewing them into rows. And so you can see I sorted everything. Once I laid it out, I just stacked everything in its rows, and then I just kind of offset them so I know easily which is each row. And if I get confused, I have the top facing this way and this way. But if I get confused, I can refer back to the photo I took of my layout, so that I stay on track, because I laid everything out. I liked the way the layout looked. I liked the way the blocks work together. And so I want to make sure I sew them together in that order. So I'm going to refer back to my kind of layout photo that I took at the end of laying all my blocks out to, to help me stay on track. But the way I like to do it, because I don't have a big design wall or anything. And so if I did, I would probably lay these all out on a design wall and then, pick them up piece by piece and kind of chain piece the whole top. But because I am just in this, spare bedroom, I don't have a design wall, I do them row by row. So I'll pick up this first row and I'll sew each piece together, and then I'll go to the ironing board and iron this row and set this row aside. And then I'll do that for every single row. And then once I have all 10 of my rows together, then impressed, and then I start sewing row by row by row to put all 10 of my rows together to complete my quilt top. So that is the plan. So I'm going to get sewing on this first row. Okay, so this is my first one, and this is my second one. So I'm going to lay them on top of each other. I'm going to put my stack over here. I have got my 1/4 inch presser foot on my machine. And I'm just going to make sure my corners are lined up. Okay, first 2 blocks are together. So I'm just going to add the other 6 blocks to this row, and then we're gonna take it over to the ironing board and press it. Okay, got the first row sewed together. So you can totally sew all your rows and then do everything at the ironing board at once. I just tend to do it row by row, where I sew a row, press a row, sew a row, press a row, and then I join all the rows together at the end. And so same as I did in the previous steps, I like to press open. Again, if you like to press to the side, then go ahead and keep pressing to the side. Do, you know, however you like to press or however you have been pressing on this project. I'm gonna try not to disturb all my others. Give it a few seconds with my clapper, and I'll do all 8 or all 7 seams. Okay, so I am just going to do this 9 more times and get all my rows put together, and then I'll come back and we'll sew all the rows into our quilt top. Okay, so I have all 10 of my rows put together, and I've laid them with the block number 1, or kind of the left side over here and the right side hanging off the bottom. And so I am going to start assembling my rows together to make the quilt top. And I think I'm actually, since they're laid out, you know, I started with number 1 and went down to number 10, I'm just going to start building the quilt top from the bottom up. So this is my bottom row. This is the next one. So I'm going to grab these 2 and pin them and get them ready for sewing. Okay, so I've got my bottom row here, I've got row number 9 here, and I am going to line them up, and I like to pin at all of my block intersections just to keep my blocks as precise as possible when I'm sewing my rows. You probably noticed when I was sewing all the rows together, I didn't pin these seams, but anytime I'm sewing quilt rows together, I always like to pin at the corners. So I'm going to set that up now, and then we'll go back over to the sewing machine. I just realized I'm pinning the wrong side. The way I laid them down, I would want to be sewing together this side. So I'm going to unpin, double check my placement, and do this again because I worked hard on my layout earlier. I want to stick to it. Okay, so I'm just flipping them over. So the side I'm pinning is close to me, and yeah, now I'm good to go. I'm glad I double checked that or thought about that. Okay, so now I've got my row all pinned and on the right side, and so now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew these 2 rows together. So yeah, I'm just using my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm just going to sew all the way down, and I'm just going to pay special attention in the corners to make sure I'm lining up my blocks and all of my seams. I have a feeling all my points in the corners will not be perfect, but I'm okay with that. This quilt I think is going to look great. But you know, I'm going to try and mind my seams and my corners and make everything line up as well as I can. First 2 rows are together, so now I'm going to go over to the ironing board. Oh good, yeah, the points are coming together just fine. Oh, I'm so excited to see this all together. Okay, I'm going to take it over to the ironing board. I'm really making sure I get the corners where the blocks meet, because there's a lot of fabric that's, you know, coming together all at once in that spot. Okay, I've got the first 2 rows sewn together. So 8 more to attach, and then I will come back and show you the finished quilt top, and we'll talk about getting the quilt ready to long arm quilt. So woohoo! Okay, let me do some more sewing. Okay, so now we have a quilt top all put together and ready. And then our next step is to make the backing of the quilt. So when making a quilt back, the pretty standard measurement is 4 inches extra on each side of your quilt to allow for shifting when quilting. I believe this applies to long arm quilting as well as at home machine quilting. You might need less overhang if you're doing it at home. Don't quote me on that. I don't ever quilt anything on my home machine. I always long arm it myself, or I send it to someone to be long armed. So all the tips that I'm going to give you today all just apply to long arm quilting. If you quilt at home, follow your own tips, follow your heart. I also recommend following any tips and tricks that are listed on your long arm quilter's website if you're sending it out to someone. I am going to be sending my quilt to Keystone Sisters Quilting, who have offered a very generous discount to all of you guys if you want to get your Fat Quarter Hourglass remix quilt quilted by a long arm service. So I will put all of the Keystone Sisters quilting information in the description box below. Please check them out if you are looking for long arm services. So on their website, they do specify that the quilt back needs to be 4 inches larger on every side, which basically means you just need your quilt width and height plus 8 inches, and that will give you 4 inches all the way around your quilt. So that's my starting point. I have my finished quilt size, and then I know what I need to make, what size I need to make my quilt backing. So there are a couple of different ways you can make a quilt backing. The first and easiest way is to buy the extra wide quilt back yardage and just get the width you need for the size of your quilt. The extra wide quilt backing is 120 inches. So for the quilt I'm making, which is 60 by 75, I would just need 68 inches, and then the 120 would give me plenty of extra for the 75 length, and then 68 covers my width across the quilt. And so that's an easy way to do it. No piecing required. You just buy extra wide quilt backing. Today though, I am using fabric from my stash, meaning I'm going to make a pieced quilt backing. I'm going to be making a very simple pieced quilt backing. It's just 2 pieces, 1 seam, using just regular 44-inch wide quilt fabric. So let me show you that. Okay, so let's talk about the backing. I have a couple of pieces of fabric here that I'm going to use. Since I kind of did this whole thing from stash, just used fat quarters from my stash, I figured let me pull out some larger pieces of fabric I have for backing. And I knew all along that I wanted to use this yellow. This might seem kind of random, but I do think yellow looks nice with the patriotic fabrics I used. And it's on the back, so it doesn't have to match, right? But the main reason that I wanted to use this is because the friend that I'm making the quilt for, she actually gave me this fabric. She had originally bought it years and years ago. Gosh, 2010-ish maybe. Let's see if there's a year on this fabric. And we actually got it in Denver at Fancy Tiger Crafts. I wonder if that place is still open. Any Denver locals, let me know. This is Joel Dewberry for Free Spirit, and it's called Block Print Blossom, but I don't see a year. Anyways, I think it's probably like 2010. But so we, she bought this fabric because we were going to possibly make her a bridesmaid's dress for a friend's wedding, and then that ended up not working out, and she just had this fabric for like, I think she gave it to me like 5 or 6 years ago. Like she had it forever and then knew she wasn't going to do anything with it. So she gave it to me because she knows I quilt. And so it's just been sitting in my stash ever since. And it's like 3.5 yards and I haven't known what to do with it. But I always kind of thought if I ever used it, I would make something and give it back to my friend just because I think that's kind of funny. So that's why I want to put this on the back of her quilt, but it's not quite enough alone. And so I think what I'm going to do is pair it with a piece of this really fun fabric. Let's see. Al Fresco by Donna Wilder, 2011. So I've had this one quite a while also, but I think they look really nice together. And obviously this ties in with the front of the quilt. So I think I'm going to do a piece of yellow and a piece of this. And I know, well, I don't know if she's going to immediately recognize the fabric, to be honest, but I know when I pointed out that she will love that yellow fabric made it into her quilt. So yeah, let me get this fabric cut out and let's make a quilt back. So since my quilt is 60 inches wide, and I want a 8-inch overhang, so 4 inches on each side, I am going to measure out, or should I do this by length? Now I'm trying to decide what I want to do. Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to go long ways. So I think that way I'll use more of this yellow fabric than I will if I do horizontal. So I think what I'm going to do is measure out the length of the quilt, which I believe is 78 inches. Let me go back and recheck my measurements. And then I will give myself an 8-inch overhang and I will cut a piece to that size. Okay, so this will be for half the backing, and now let me cut the same size piece out of the other fabric. Excited to finally be using this fabric. It has been sitting in my stash forever. It's so pretty. So now that I have my 2 long pieces, they're gonna end up getting sewed selvage edge to selvage edge. So I wanna cut these selvages off. The selvages are stronger than the inside of the fabric, meaning they don't stretch in the same way and they can kind of distort your seams. So I always like to cut selvages off before I sew anything onto the edge of a piece of fabric. Oh, hi, Diego. Oh, hi. Yeah. So also, these 2 fabrics sewn together side to side would be about 84 inches, which is a lot wider than what I need it to be. Let's see, my quilt's 60 inches wide, so I need a 68-inch wide backing. And so 42, let's see, 68 minus 42 is 26. So from this fabric, I only need 26 inches. So maybe what I'll do is measure in 13 and cut, and that way this will be a 26-inch piece by the length of my quilt. Yes, let's do that. And so I'm going to use my folded edge of my fabric as my straight edge. That's going to be my constant for measuring 13 inches. And actually I'm going to do 14. I'm just going to give myself a tiny bit more cushion. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, since I don't have a ruler that's 14 inches wide, let's see, I'm going to cut 14 inches here. And then I'm going to create a line up here. And that's what I'm going to use to kind of follow along. Okay. And this will make sure that the yellow fabric stays more prominent because more of the quilt will need to be moved to the yellow side when the long arm quilters load this on the machine. So if I sent it extra wide with all this fabric, I could tell them, you know, set it to the left, but they might forget or they might just automatically load it down the center. So I think it's going to help to make my backing exactly the size I want it to be. Okay, and now I have this big weird piece of leftovers that I'm definitely going to keep, because if I ever want to use it to make strips or even small scraps for quilt blocks, this would be great. So, and now I've got my 28 inch wide piece of backing, and then let me get the selvages off the yellow piece and then we'll sew them side by side. Okay, so now I got the selvages cut off so I can sew my pieces side by side. I'm just gonna make sure my ends are relatively squared up. Let's see. Yeah, that one's fine. It's mostly fine, but okay. All right, I think I'm good to sew these together. Okay, so after I had my two pieces properly cut out, I just put one seam straight down the center, and now I have my pieced quilt backing, and you can see the yellow is the wider part and the flowers. Actually, I'll just put a full photo in here so you can see it. Piecing a quilt back is definitely the process that I use most often, just because I usually want to use fabric from a line that I'm sewing with on the front, and they don't always come in wide back, but wide back is definitely my favorite way to make a quilt back because you don't have to make it, you just cut it out. So it's the simplest, easiest way to go, but I do like making interesting quilt backs a lot of times, or just using fabric from stash to be thrifty. So this is the way I most often piece together my quilt backs. When I laid out my quilt back to take a photo, I also laid my quilt top on top of it just to make sure I had my spacing correct, and I did. So now I think it's ready to send for quilting. The last thing you're gonna need for getting your quilt quilted is batting. Typically, like 90% of the time, I use a 100% cotton batting in the lowest loft available. Quilter's Dream has a super low loft. I think they call it summer weight. That is my favorite, but I'm not super picky. I will just pick, you know, either what my long arm studio has available or what the long arm quilter I'm sending my quilt to has available. And I almost always pick the 100% cotton. Lately though, my quilt studio, which is Over the Top Quilting in Cedar Park, Texas, they have, they prefer 80-20, which is 80% cotton, 20% poly. And I have used it a few times lately, and it is lighter weight, like pound, what? It's not pounds. What's the right word? And it literally is a lighter weight, meaning it weighs less than 100% cotton of the same loft, of the same thickness. And so I have started using that lately, and I really like it. So I don't know that I even have a preference anymore between 80-20 and 100% cotton. I think 80-20 is the most popular and preferred by most long arm quilters. Anybody in the comments, feel free to correct me. But basically, I just want the thinnest, lowest loft available. I'm in Texas and I love to use my quilts, so I don't want anything super heavy or thick. I want a very thin, lightweight quilt. So that's what I look for in batting. My absolute favorite batting, and if it wasn't so expensive, I would use it in every quilt, is Quilter's Dream Orient Express Bamboo. Is it Orient Express, or am I confusing that with Agatha Christie? I think it's called Orient Dream. I'll put it on the screen. Anyways, it's 100% bamboo and it is absolutely beautiful. It is my favorite, lightest weight. It makes silky feeling quilts. So I've used that several times, but it's really pricey. So I try to use it just for, you know, like bed quilts that I know I'm going to use all the time. So yeah, those are kind of the battings that I choose from. I think on this quilt, I'm going to be going with just the 80-20 and quilting patterns, quilting designs. So if you're sending it out to a long armor, they will usually have on their website a section where you can kind of look through patterns, or just go on Pinterest and look up, you know, long arm quilting patterns or long arm quilting pantographs. That's kind of what I do, or I go on Instagram and follow I follow a lot of long arm quilters, and I'll just look through their photos where they show off different quilting designs to get an idea of what I want quilted on my quilt. I have an idea in mind for this one, I think. I'm thinking some sort of wavy lines that make it look like a flag, but I also really want to see what the Keystone sisters have to say and what they recommend for my quilt. So don't know exactly what I'm going to quilt on it yet, but I have a couple of ideas. Oh, my other tip for mailing a quilt to be quilted is when you mail it, try to wrap your quilt in plastic, whether that's like giant Ziploc bags or just plastic grocery bags, double bagged, to kind of protect it in case the box is damaged in shipping. What I like to do is keep those big giant Ziploc bags that Fat Quarter Shop mails their fabric in, and then fold up my quilt top and backing and shove it in those plastic Ziploc bags. And so I feel like that's a really nice way to reuse some packaging from fabric that gets sent to my house and to help protect my quilt while it's being shipped. Okay, I think that's all the information I have to share with you today. I will be back just as soon as my quilt is back from the long arm quilter, and we will wrap up with binding our quilt and getting it all finished. So can't wait, and I'll see you next time.